to become sustainable, it decided to become a company. Today, we're going to talk about something that isn't a company, or isn't a company anymore. We're going to talk about Node. So to start off, how many people here use Node? Awesome. All right. So unlike its early days, Node actually has now become basically primarily used as a build step for front-end developers. You can use it to build robots and APIs, but almost entirely people are using it for build steps to do front-end development. So Node was born, quote unquote, insofar as any software can be born, in 2009, which makes it around 8 years old today. And Joyent is the company that ran the Node project. And Node was announced formally by its creator, Ryan Dahl, at JSConf 2009 in Washington, D.C. And while it changed hands from Ryan to several other maintainers, Joyent was always running this project. And Node was extremely successful. In the years following its announcement, it grew tremendously. People were releasing lots of fascinating libraries for it. Express was one of the first ones to come out, followed by Socket.io. And lots of large, relatively exciting companies at the time were not only using Node, but were being loud about using it. Companies like Uber, LinkedIn. I'm not saying these are good companies. I'm just saying they're ones we all know. PayPal, Walmart. They were all using Node, and they were all being really, really loud about it. And that was really making people quite excited. People were very excited about the adoption of this technology. We seemed to be scratching an itch, a problem that people had, and that was really great. But in 2013, after changing hands from Ryan to Isaac Schleuder to TJ Fontaine, contributions and releases started to slow down. We saw a dramatic reduction in the number of commits on the project, and also in releases, dramatically. And this type of activity actually really threatened Node's ability to continue being successful in the enterprise. And one of the biggest issues was that Node had not yet 1.0'd. And if anybody understands even slightly how Semver works, if something is not 1.0, it is not stable. And so to get any enterprise to actually use that product is relatively difficult, because you have absolutely no stability guarantees. I'm going to quickly pour myself some. Oh, here's my water. All right. So there was a growing discontent about all of this. And so Joyent kind of caught wind of this, and they decided to form this thing called the Node.js Advisory Board. I should have asked, do we have any old school Node people in the audience who are going to correct me later on all of this history? I tried really hard, OK? So anyways, Joyent created this thing called the Node.js Advisory Board. And this was actually a really fascinating group of people, because literally anybody could be a member of it, and it didn't cost money. So this is actually very interesting, and it's quite different than the way the foundation ended up forming out. Now, unfortunately for Joyent, it turns out that this Node.js Advisory Board was a little bit too little, too late. And in 2014, in November, Fedor indutny decided, I'm done with this. Nothing has gotten done. I feel like we're stuck in bureaucracy. I'm going to fork Node and create iojs. And that's exactly what he did. Now, when he created iojs, he was never intending for the fork to create any sort of competition. The idea was not that iojs would become a competitor to Node. Rather, it's that this group of people who were among the core contributors to Node at the time were extremely frustrated with how the project is being run. And therefore, they created their own version with a focus on expanding collaboration to make it easier for more people to collaborate to the project, and then additionally to also open up the governance. A project being run exclusively by a single company had been really holding them back, and it also was of the belief of the core contributors that a company owning the product was actually stopping other companies from wanting to adopt it. So this continued on for some time, and in February of 2015, Joyent decided to make the step to move to establish the Node.js Foundation, which is currently the thing that runs the Node project. And after some cajoling and a bit of talking and several GitHub issues, all of which are linked in here, iojs decided to reconcile the fork and join the Node Foundation, all under the name Node.js. And so all of this happened right before my story in Node starts. And while this seems dramatic, I assure you the drama increases. So this is where my story starts. So in November of 2015, this is only several months after the fork had been fixed, my friend Miles, who I had actually been seeing in San Francisco because I was visiting to do work at NPM, had opened up an issue suggesting that the word suicide be replaced in the Node API, because the word suicide just didn't seem either technically necessary or terribly friendly. Now, there may be people in the crowd here who go, well, suicide's all over Unix. Doesn't that make it OK? This is not the point of this story. So Miles opened up this issue, and several people followed up to say, hey, you know, that's probably a relatively easy change that we can make. Why don't we do it? Now, unfortunately, this is not exactly what happened. But what happened next happened a bit after I saw this issue. And this was my very first comment on the Node.js repo, where I was just saying, yay, thanks for kicking this off. This is super awesome. I've been working in open source for an extremely long time. I'd been working in tech for a while. And I had had some pretty terrible experiences. I come from the Ruby community, which is both amazing and extremely plagued with problems, like many communities are. So I was like, you know, this community, they're opening an issue to try and be more inclusive. This is my jam. Let's try this out. So I got really excited. I was like, yeah, let's tweet about this. This is a theme. I tweet about everything. So I was like, yeah, this is going to be really great. And so I had been having a pretty good time. You know, I was like, I got this. I really do. But narrator, no, I did not. So it turns out that that issue actually became an extremely huge problem, where people both from communities on Reddit and even Fortune and 8chan came in to make harassing comments to the people who were contributing. Not only were those people, the people you expect to be the trolls trolling, but people from the Node core team participated in this as well. So it was extremely frustrating to see the community itself actually trolling itself. And so at this point, I was like, oh my goodness, what the heck? We got to do something. And I had been talking to some friends, and they spoke about how just the year before at their Node adventure, which is a fascinating camping trip they all take together, they had come up with the idea to start an inclusivity working group, which would be a group that would focus on the code of conduct, help do moderation, and potentially be able to explain and educate people who are initially turned off by issues like the one I just showed you, and explain to them why they're important and better ways to channel their energies. And this sounded perfect because I was really angry. It's wildly embarrassing to see a community undermine itself so much, where the core team will literally be saying rude and horrible comments to other members of their community. And so I was mad. I was like, who enforces your code of conduct? Because so far, I can't tell. So unlike many programming communities, at least Node had a code of conduct, but they weren't enforcing it. And in my mind, that made it just as worse. So, and a lot of people had been tweeting about this, and I was like, you know what? It's not even the randos that are bothering me. It's the fact that the core team itself is what the problem is. I want to block the maintainers. And this is just one of the comments that made me upset. So I had ended up on IRC chatting about some of these things. And this is Ben Nordhaus, who's one of the OG Node people, saying, I was really irritated by that issue because it truly spammed my GitHub timeline. It was a lot of familiar nicknames. It's always the same people, isn't it? And in my head, I was like, really? It's the same people? You mean it's like women? You mean people who care about their community? Yeah, it's the same people. And it's because you are not creating a space that is safe for them, and you apparently care more about your GitHub timeline and your notifications than you do about including people who could potentially bring a lot to your community. And so you'd think maybe it stopped there, but it didn't. So I had started working very closely. Yes, this is exactly as funny as you might imagine it was. I had started working closely with the inclusivity working group, and nearly immediately people got word of this. This whole thread about, oh, Node is some very soft SJWs. They want to remove the word suicide. And so inevitably, this ended up on a place called 8chan, which I didn't even know existed. I thought there was only 4chan, and I didn't really even understand 4chan. My best understanding is that when you get banned from Reddit, you go to 4chan, and I guess when you get banned from 4chan, you go to 8chan. I don't know if there's a 64chan or something. I don't know if that happens, but I hope it doesn't. I haven't ended up on that yet. But I had been flying to a conference called November, and I landed in Tennessee, which is a state I had never been to. And I had a direct message from Michael Rogers, who's the community manager of Node. And he was like, I just want to let you know you're on 8chan. And I was like, what's that mean? Seems bad. And then I look at my mailbox, and it's just epic GitHub notifications. And what had been happening is that they had decided to form armies of new accounts to just spam all of our GitHub threads with eggplants, for reasons that I'll leave you to decide why they may have done that. But yes, messages like, hello, I am eggplant. I have something to share with you humans. Just a whole bunch of nonsense in addition to some really horrible stuff. So it was like, oh my goodness. I learned a whole lot about GitHub's moderation tools that day. And I'm glad to say they have improved significantly since that time. They were pretty bad. So I learned how to block people on GitHub, which was super fun. And so I was still feeling pretty okay about this. I was like, yeah, I'm going to own this, whatever. I'm a vegan. I eat mad eggplant. But yeah, I was trying to keep in good spirits about this, but it was really wearing me out. So again, this is me in Tennessee, and I was like, I wish I was full of tacos and not emotions, because this was really wearing me down. And for anybody who possibly knows about what had gone down at that November this year, that was also the year that Douglas Crockford gave an extremely tenuous talk that was rather upsetting to several people. But fundamentally, it wasn't these trolls, again, that were upsetting me. Trolls happen. I get it. I've been on the internet. The thing that I was upset about is that in addition to these trolls, we continued to be harassed by the Node core team itself. Now, their harassment was not as overt. I'm certainly not suggesting that the core team was putting eggplants on our issues, because that would be too easy, right? I'd be like, why are you putting eggplants on our issues? But instead, they were doing several other things. So after this incident, I felt really motivated to act. And I was like, I'm going to revive this working group. We're going to get some stuff done. And in order to do that, we needed to charter something. Does anybody here participate in any Node working groups? All right, you should consider doing that. It's super fun. But maybe don't listen to this story about that. Oh, no. I promise you it's fun. It's getting better. This ends well. But yeah. So you can take a look here. These were some pretty deep comment threads. I added our charter, which garnered me a good 127 comments. And I actually finally added our code of conduct, which if you'll note, I definitely opened between November 19th and 18th, but only actually got merged in January of the next year. And it took 93 comments to get there. So this was taking a long time. Why the heck was this taking so long? We have a simple message. We want to make things chiller for more people in the community. And so these are some of the threads that have been left. All of this is open source, but a lot of them have been moderated since. And these are some comments that we were given. So this ends by saying, however, one thing I've come to learn is that in my experience, aggressive action begets an aggressive response. Considered action begets a considered response. I would caution the members of this implied aggressive working group to consider that could very well end up undermining their own goals. So this is someone who said that they don't agree or sign off, but they say that our charter was a significant improvement over previous drafts. This is very common with a lot of what we got, which was that people just absolutely refused to merge anything that we suggested, and would continuously nitpick, and also nitpick in a way that somehow also looked like an essay, just to kind of slow down our progress. And unfortunately, some of the things were even a little bit more horrible. So this was actually the chair of the TSC at the time. And he was worried that when we dealt with code of conduct issues, that we wanted to create a private space for people to come report issues. And he was afraid of this, and the way he said it is, we should not allow any perception of a Spanish Inquisition. So to actually enforce the code of conduct and give people a private space to report issues, we were now becoming the Spanish Inquisition, which was an absolutely absurd claim. And it was extremely frustrating. But inevitably, after an extremely long period of time, we finally got the inclusivity working group charter merged, which is that fundamentally we were finally recognized as a working group under the TSC, which meant that we could actually start working with contributors and trying to improve the space for people who were new and wanted to get involved in Node. Around this time, they had actually opened up an ability for all individual people associated with the Node project to actually become an individual member. How many people here knew you could be an individual member of Node? Yeah, this is another problem with this project. So you can pay a small stipend, or if you have contributed in any way to the project, it's free. And basically the only thing that you get, and this is why most people don't know about it, is that you get to vote for an individual membership director. Now, the individual member directorship basically is that there are two people who sit on the Node board and have a vote. So anything that comes to the Node board, those people are allowed to vote on. And the goal with these people is that they represent the community, because the Node board is made only of paying enterprise customers. And only the highest tiers of those paying customers actually get a vote on the board. So given that Node had such grassroots and people who were trying to work like individually and expand collaborators and like engage with the community, the board decided that they needed to have individual membership represented there. And so I had been feeling pretty good. I had finally gotten this inclusivity working. It seemed like a lot of people outside the Node project were actually very excited about this whole inclusivity initiative, despite the fact that within the project, we continued to run into roadblocks. So I decided to run. I was like, hey, I'm running for the Node Foundation Board of Directors. I'm pretty sure nobody knows what this is yet, but like, let's try it out. And so I ran basically on a platform of all the things I care about. Which is I really like documentation, I care about beginner experiences, I like writing educational resources, and I really wanted inclusivity and diversity to be something that was important to Node. I really wanted to change the face of Node, because Node didn't have any underrepresented people in the project. It was extremely whitewashed, and it was extremely men only. And so I was like, all right, I think if I could maybe get a little power representing the community, maybe this power is going to help me work through the issues that I'm having with the core technical committee and the TSC. And I won. I won the election. This is the first thing I've ever ran for, and I won. And I won by a lot, and this was extremely exciting, because I was like, yes, I'm going to represent the community, and they like really want me to. Because you know, if it's like a vote from the community and you get like 51%, you're like, oh, maybe it's not great. But this was good. I had won by a lot, and so I was really, really amped. And so because a lot of my things had to do with beginner experiences and education initiatives, I got to work quick. I love getting to work. And so I was like, I'm going to start a beginner education initiative for Node, just kind of like the Rails Girls program or something like that. And so I started this program called Node Together. And Node Together was super awesome. It was focused on underrepresented people, which I really wanted to get into the Node community. And I also focused on teaching brand new people, which Node generally had a lot of, but did very poorly with. And so I held the first one in LA literally the month I started this project. And I went from there to many, many, many other places. In just that year alone, I did 8 events in 5 countries, I was really busy. And it took a lot out of me. But it was also really, really, really rewarding. Additionally, I had the opportunity to run NPM's first and potentially only conference called NPM Camp. And I took those goals of being inclusive and diverse and focusing on beginner experiences to design an event that I think went extremely well. The people really speak for themselves. People had a really good time. And I was really impressed. We didn't just have some female speakers or some underrepresented speakers or speakers of color. We had a majority of them. In fact, if you were a white dude and you wanted to talk at the conference, your chances were basically nil. And that's because we just had so many amazing people from underrepresented groups apply, and we really wanted to give them a platform. And that was super awesome. And strangely enough, after having all of these amazing experiences, I was actually really pissed. I was like really, really angry. While I had been doing all of this work, continued derailment and harassment had slowly eroded the inclusivity working group that we had put together. People, person by person, every non-binary and female member left the group. And I was angry. So when I was leaving Node NPM camp, I was in the SFO airport. I did something that you should never do, which is tweet something controversial before you get on a cross-country airplane. And this is what I said. I said, July was a pretty intense month, but it's clarified a few things for me. Inclusive and diverse spaces for Node are possible, and they actually aren't that difficult to create. I had a team of around 1 to 3 people and basically 0 budget. And Node Together and NPM Camp have been overwhelmingly successful. So I am tired and angry of Node.js leadership. Inclusive spaces are totally within your reach, but at this point, it's hard for me to believe anything besides the fact that it's clear that you don't want them. And the name of this image in this presentation is the bad tweet. And I call it the bad tweet. Well, I also quit the inclusivity working group immediately after tweeting that. But I call it the bad tweet because I actually got in legal trouble for saying that. I'm going to pour myself some more water before I get into it, because this kind of blew my mind. All right. So I was called up. In fact, I was called up, and apparently they left several voicemails for me, which blew my mind, because I very specifically do not set up a voicemail box. Do not call me unless you are on fire or already dead. But they had left me several voicemails somehow, and they told me that me tweeting about Node not being inclusive had cost the foundation money. That people had seen my tweets and said, we were thinking about giving Node money, but this woman is on your board, isn't she? And she's tweeting this stuff. Now, my first response was, whoa, somebody cares so much about inclusivity that they're going to put their money behind it? I want to meet that person. We probably have some stuff in common. But unfortunately, I had to more immediately focus on the fact that I was told that I violated my fiduciary duty. I do not know how to translate that in German. Does it translate for y'all? Basically, I looked it up on the business dictionary, because that's a thing. I liked it because obviously they're tracking that I was doing history of Joyent stuff with this ad. But your fiduciary duty is your legal obligation to act in the best interest of another. And then hearing this from the foundation, I was like, you're telling me I violated my fiduciary duty? Everything I said is what I believe was in the best interest of Node. There's a problem here. We're not treating people correctly. We're not building the spaces that we need to be building. And someone needs to say that. Like, criticism is how we grow, right? And that is not the response I got. Instead, they told me, no, it's okay. You're not used to being on a board. It's all right. We know you didn't mean it, right? And in my head, I'm like, narrator voice, she meant it. For sure, I was not upset or sad about what I had tweeted. I had genuinely believed in it. And it was fascinating to me that the board was saying not only were they upset about this, but that they had investors who said that they weren't giving money because I had said this, which is why I started saying, I caution you on following me on Twitter. Anyways, they took it a step further. And this was particularly insulting. As somebody who had been fighting for diversity and inclusion, the board decided to create a code of conduct for the board that would prevent me from tweeting any criticism about Node without consequence again. They couldn't punish me because they didn't have rules, but they decided that they were going to make rules, call them a code of conduct, to make sure that I would not tweet criticism of Node again. And I feel like there's a small part of me that died when that happened. Because in that November of 2015, when I was getting riled up, getting excited about participating, I had tweeted this. I said, no, you cannot shame me into not tweeting about this. The tweeting will continue until inclusivity improves, or I am threatened with legal action, apparently. And that was a pretty big bummer. In addition to that, a member of the TSC, who I'm not allowed to name, contacted my employer, NPM, requesting that I be disciplined. The discipline was vague, but I assumed that they were coming for my job. This had become a pretty serious situation. I was scared. I was being threatened with legal action by a large legal entity with a bunch of money, and people were trying to get me fired from my job. And you have to start to wonder, wow, what was I doing that was so scary? But no one else seemed to be terribly scared of me, but I was really scared. The thing that it did indicate to me was that I had felt empowered because I worked at NPM. And NPM was such a force in the community and was such a great company to work for that I felt safe. And it became immediately clear to me, if I was working anywhere other than NPM, I might have been fired. And so when we ask ourselves why other people don't stand up for these issues, this is why. It's because people come after you for your jobs, and lots of the people I had been collaborating with, I immediately sent them notices. I'm like, yo, you need to be careful. This is actually becoming a dangerous situation. Additionally, to add insult to injury, literal insult, by the way, the chair of the board in a board meeting decided to call me the Richard Stallman of inclusivity. Do we know who Richard Stallman is here? Yeah. So she didn't mean it as a compliment, at least as far as I can tell. She prefaced it with, I don't think you're going to like this. And she said this in the board meeting, and no one said anything. So I guess you can just insult people. I guess that's what being on a board is. I don't know. But it bummed me out. And Richard Stallman's a pretty problematic person. I am a fan of copyleft in general. For people who maybe are not as familiar with him, his biggest, kind of the hill he dies on, is this argument between free software and open source software. And when he says free, he does not mean free as in beer. He's very specific about this. He means free as in freedom. All right? And fundamentally, he says open source is a development methodology, but free software is a social movement. And so to a certain extent, the board was right. I did want a social movement. That was what I was going for, and maybe I didn't completely know that, but I guess at this point, that's what I was trying to do. Now, I'm very upset because additionally after that, members of the board have told me that the board is not and should not be political. And I'm someone who's like, nothing is not political. What are you talking about? But it really made, okay, so what does the Node Foundation actually do? What did I sign up for with this? What is the role of foundations in general? And the best answer I could come up with was it's about sustainability. This is fundamentally why the Node Foundation formed in the beginning, to help build a project that had more sustainable tech practices. But fundamentally, foundations mean economic sustainability, pretty much exclusively. If you ask me what the Node Foundation does, all right, the first thing I'd tell you is the dirty secret of all open source is that somebody pays for it. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a second. But what the board does is it recruits sponsor companies who give them money. With that money, they market Node.js to companies who can then become sponsors to give them money. And then they also do some legal shenanigans, because I assume they use the money to pay for the lawyer. But beyond this, I have not seen the Node Foundation do anything else, and I've seen them actively reject any other request for work from them. So to get into the whole politics of open source thing and why I find the fact that the Node Foundation does not want to consider itself political ends up being this cartoon. This is probably the most popular tweet I've ever had. It's pretty weird. And like many tweets, I did it hastily. And so I have several conditions to say before I say this and read you the cartoon. This is not a true story about Facebook. It's not based on a true story on Facebook. I just think Fartbook is a funny name. It's kind of a fable, you can say. Apologies to the good people who work at Facebook and on Babel who took offense to this, but no apologies to the company Facebook because I do not apologize to companies. The cartoon goes as such. Joe and Jim work at Fartbook, and they both make $150,000 a year. That's what American developers make mostly. As a hobby, they stay late and work on Blabble, an open source tool Fartbook uses for their for-profit software. Jim dies from stress already, right? Rest in peace, Jim, and Jim's computer. So Fartbook now needs to hire someone new. They hire Pam to replace Jim. Rest in peace, Jim. Pam is paid $130 because she's a lady and we don't have pay equity in the United States. So Joe and Pam work well together, but Pam has different hobbies. Pam likes to paint. So unfortunately, when Fartbook software breaks because of a bug in Blabble, all right, Pam says she'll help out, but only during work hours, which means that she'll need to push off other deadlines. So her work on Sparkle Turd is going to have to, go to the wayside for a bit. And so the Fartbook exec, which I drew here as an actual fart wearing a tie, is pissed because now he has to pay for open source software. He fires Pam for not being productive. Meanwhile, Joe dies of stress. Rest in peace, Joe. All right, so now Fartbook, the exec, is extremely upset. He changes his hiring policy so that they only hire people who have proven themselves in open source. So he gets some people, and Blabble is fixed. And then I made a small mistake there. Don't read the cross out. But all the employees do is work. They are paid the same as always because this is considered part of the job. So now it appears that everyone who can't afford to work 24/7 is unemployed. And the Fartbook execs are getting extremely rich. So what's the end to this story? There are two endings. All right? The endings are we come together and stop working for free and fight for workers' rights. Or everyone who can't afford to work 24/7 all the time, dies of poverty. The Fartbook employee dies of stress. And the Fartbook exploits brand new people, and they continue to make a ton of money. So I don't know if this is a familiar experience to you, but it is certainly one for me as somebody who has worked at open source companies my entire life. Now, you might be wondering, gosh, this sounds pretty political, Ashley. And it is, and I'm running out of time, so it's going to be an extremely short interlude into how capitalism works. Because fundamentally, this is what the problem with open source is. So how does it even? All right? So capitalism is based on this idea of capital and this idea of owning something called the means of production. So we have our boss man here, and yes, duh, it's a man. Feminism is inherently anti-capitalist. But the boss man has money, he owns the means of production. He hires workers to sell their labor. And the trick here, and this is really the game of capitalism, is the worker works and gets paid for their work. But they don't get to own their work product because the boss man owns the means of production. Think of that as your company laptop. And so the boss man gets the work product. Now, taking this profit from the work product, the boss man first has to pay for the operating costs, which is anything the means of production cost. And then what's ever left over is called capital. And capital is very fun. This is the namesake of capitalism. It's the money that makes money. And this means that this is money that can get reinvested into hiring more laborers from whom they can derive work product. Now, the whole goal of capitalism is to reduce operating costs so that you can increase capital, which is what is considered success in the market. Ta-da. And you may already be predicting this, but open source is an amazing way to reduce your operating costs. This is because, of course, enterprise companies report extremely epic ROIs on using open source software. In fact, you'll see many foundation people arguing that open source is better because of the improved ROI. Now, to me, this seems obvious. It's because the investment, is way less. Because as it turns out, most people do not get paid to write open source. How many people in here get paid to write open source? OK, how many people in here use open source? At companies that make money? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. All right. So again, as I said, the dirty secret of open source is someone pays for it. So in a certain way, they pay with their lives. You know, rest in peace, Jim, Joe. All right. Most developers who do open source have this kind of funny way of explaining it, where it's like a gift of their time. But let's think about that for a second, right? And I mean, I get it. I am just as guilty. I love gifting my time. But most people actually need to sell basically all of their time to live. And if that's the case, they don't have extra time to be gifting corporations some of their labor, which they could sell to keep their family alive. So this system does not work at all for those people. All right? And even for those who it could work for, there are so many burnout stories. There are links in here to them. I wanted to tell them, but I've already spent too long telling my own burnout story. All right? And so what I'd like to do is leave you with a couple of ideas about what to make of all of this. I've certainly presented a whole bunch of things. And so I have kind of 3 problems. But you know, with 3 problems, it's really just one all rolled into different pieces. And so the first one is this thing that we kind of all understand. I heard software is eating the world from Golo. It was the only English and the German he was saying. So I was like, I got it. I'll use it. And so the idea is that increasingly our digital infrastructure is based on this open source code. And this is a huge problem because it's overburdened and undersupported. This is partially because foundation-based solutions like the Node Foundation focus on financial stability and refuse to deal with the very clear problem that we have, which is a social one. In fact, they actually pit the economic agenda against the social agenda, which is to say, I have absolutely heard people in charge of the Linux Foundation say, it's OK to be an asshole because you get better ideas that way. That's a direct quote from a TED Talk from the head of the Linux Foundation, which is horrifying. I've additionally been told by the chair of the Node Foundation that, you know, people who are not very socially adept are better at computers. It's just the case. And I'm like, whoa. The worst one, though, is when they say, well, if we make it inclusive for more people, then the people who don't like that will leave, and they are better programmers. And then because off by 1 errors are very common in computer science, number 4 of the 3 problems is that we are afraid to do the work to change this because it is uncomfortable. And this is the biggest one. Because fundamentally, I do not believe that anybody is really a monster. But I do believe that many people in our governance are afraid of challenging these problems. Now, there is some hope. There is some really cool stuff happening in the Node Foundation that if you're interested in this problem, you should get involved in. These are 3 people to definitely know. Tracy Hines runs the education part of the Node Foundation. She's working on lots of very cool initiatives. William Kapke is the other individual membership director who works with me. And then Miles Borns is on the CTC and runs several of the technical projects in the Node project, but cares a lot about improving the social situation. We recently formed something called the Node Community Committee. The idea being that being an inclusivity working group under the TSC failed because we didn't have buy-in from the TSC. So what if we made a group that sat next to the TSC with equal power that cared about building community? Yes, it's complicated. We're looking for people to get involved, though, and it's been a lot more smooth sailing so far. Additionally, we need to be funding humanities research on open source work. An article that I list in this is a white paper about burnout stories from people who work in open source, and it's extremely telling, and I encourage everyone to read it. She's actually hired as an open source researcher at GitHub, which is extremely cool. And then, additionally, the thing that I want to point out is even communities and conferences like this one are doing more than our major bodies are. This conference has a code of conduct. I know for a fact that TC39, which does the ECMAScript spec, is only considering one recently. So that's the thing to say. We are actually leading from the bottom up, and this is why community representation is so important. However, a fish does rot from the head, as the saying goes. And we are consistently losing people, and to be honest, I think a lot about quitting. I actually kind of fantasized about like quitting everything just on stage here today. I really actually like wanted to do that. And I was like 50-50 this morning. But you can check the Git commits, I promise you this. And it's because I have this sinking feeling that things don't get better. And for a long time, things have not been better. I mean, even literally yesterday, I ended up on Hacker News because I was like, we could improve this pragma in Rust by making it a little more friendly instead of telling people to allow bad style to make the lint shut up. It's like, that's kind of mean. Can we change it? Boom, Hacker News. Huge mess. But then I talked to one of my colleagues, and he said, you know, in my experience, you're right. Most things do not get better at all. You're totally right. However, the things that do are really worth it. And so instead of quitting, I'm here to say, I saw a lot of people say that they don't work in open source, and I would like to see that change. I need your help. So I called this talk an exaggeration, but that's because I'm nervous and scared. And it's actually just a straight up true story. This is like, and my story is not even the worst of many people's out there. But luckily it's not over yet. And so tech is shitty. It's the case. If you ask someone for a stereotype of a tech person, it's not going to be positive. And that doesn't mean that we all are bad. We're not. Not all techies me. But tech is shitty because we haven't done the work to not make it shitty. But I think we can do that work, and I think that's possible. And I partially think of this because if you look at the history of Node, Node was actually founded on pretty radical ideas by people who were just like, I want to do this thing because it matters. And when I think about the fork, Fedor, like, he didn't wait. He was like, this is sucking. I'm forking. You're going to deal with me. And to a certain extent, I mean, somebody did troll in the original inclusivity working group. You want to fork? I'm not suggesting we fork Node. Please don't put that on Hacker News. But, you know, I think we can do something. And so what I want to leave you with is this fact. And I've talked a lot about history and a little bit about near history. But I was reading this essay by Brian Cantrell called The Power of a Pronoun. And it has to do with somebody who had opened up an issue on libuv, a PR, to change 2 lines of the words him and he to they and them. And you might remember this character from earlier, but this person decided to respond like this. Sorry, not interested in trivial changes like that. Now, this was in 2013. So, okay, maybe, you know. The article, Power of a Pronoun, was Brian Cantrell saying, Ben doesn't work for me, but Node is a Joyent project, and if it was fully a Joyent project and he worked for me, I would fire him immediately. And so this is what I want you to question about whether the foundation is positive. Because remember this? This is actually the PR from that issue that I mentioned to you at the very beginning of this talk about removing the word suicide. You'll note that this PR was closed, but it was opened 6 days ago. And that's because they never actually finished the work. They didn't do it. Even though they kind of said they would, they waved their hands. But they clearly didn't care. So Isaac came in and decided to do it. And believe you me, we did clean up the track, so I can't give you the quotes. But moderation was still a mess, and our character Ben showed up. Because it turns out that even though Joyent would have fired him, Node didn't. Node kept him, and Node has a problem of keeping around people who are toxic to its community. So again, most things don't get better, but the things that do are really worth it. Node needs to get better so that everyone can participate, because in order to succeed, Node needs everyone's help, and everyone is not here. Thank you.
So, thank you, Ashley, for your interesting and inspiring talk. I think we will think about it and talk about it a lot this conference. Da wir ein wenig Zeit